work in process or unbilled revenue, because very frankly, I have passed from the old accounting kind of a background when I did my chartered accountancy. The kind of entries that I see with multinationals right now are mind-boggling. They kind of try and take the same entry to multiple number of accounts. They will first put it to an account receivable account, from there it will go to an associated enterprise account, and from there it will move to a third account. You actually run into a maze in terms of going through these accounting entries. Typically people don't want to kind of disclose or don't hit the unbilled revenue or work in process to the associated enterprise account, because it's not kind of billed or it's not agreed with the associated enterprise, but because of the accounting standards, etc., you have to accrue it. It's a sales ultimately. It's ultimately a sales you are going to recognize as an income. If you don't disclose it this year, as in the form 3CB with an associated enterprises, the income pertains to this year, but arm's length price would be determined in the next year, because if you disclose it in next year, when it is actually transferred to the AE account. So these issues will remain. These are the issues that we need to think through. Work in process, I believe, should be disclosed right at the start, when irrespective of whether the fact it is hit the AE account or not, or whether the entry is passed in associated enterprise account or not. Because ultimately it pertains to that associated enterprises. It's only an accounting issue that it will be passed on 1st of April or 30th of April next year, and not on the 31st of March of this year. So these are all the issues that one has to be extremely careful, because we are supposed to report true and correct. And I have seen where people have not reported properly, the calculation of arm's length price gets disturbed. Because, for example, if you've done 100 sales, and out of it 60 is actual sales and 40 is work in process, and if you reported 60 rupees in the form 3CB as intercompany transaction, the DPO will determine 120 as the arm's length value, for example. So he says that 120 is the arm's length value. You have reported 60. I'm going to add entire 60 to the return of income. Whereas actually the other 40 is also offered, but as work in process. So such kind of issues have also come, where TPO kind of have failed to recognize the fact that there is a work in process sitting in the income of tax being paid on it, but yet again being taxed by way of transfer pricing adjustment. So better to report the full value. Again, TDS is again one aspect, withholding tax is again one aspect, where, for say example, availing services, generally you find that foreign companies would say that the withholding tax is your headache, not my headache, and therefore it should be borne by you. So in cases where there are net of tax contracts, where the tax is to be borne by the Indian company, whether again you report the entire amount including taxes, or you report only the net amount which is being paid. The concept is again, what is the expense amount? The expense amount would be the entire amount in this case. It's a reverse analogy over here. Doesn't apply the same thing to service tax. So ultimately 100 rupees is the management fee, suppose if you pay, and another 10 rupees is the withholding tax that you are supposed to bear and pay to the government. Ultimately your expense is 110. By grossing up, you will make a grossing up entry, and your expense will come back to 110. So in that case, although 10 represents TDS or withholding tax, actually you should report 110 only. Clause 14 talks, this clause 14, 15, 16 basically talks about financial transactions, or where the funding and all this is involved. Clause 14 talks about lending and borrowing of money, including any type of advance payments, deferred payments, receivable, non-convertible preference shares, debentures, or any debt arising during the course of the business. So pretty wide definition. All your advances, share capital, all that transactions would come under either clause 14, 15 or 16 under the definition of financial transactions in the subclause of international transaction. So generally advance payments would come over here in clause 14. Share capital would generally, if it's on the equity share capital, it should come under clause 16. Guarantee amount would come, guarantee disclosure would come under clause 15. Questions, many questions on the financial transaction side. Firstly, on the share capital, whether it's an international transaction or not, whether it's a transaction per se to be reported or not. I think the matter is going in the tribunal, and the high courts would be the best judge to decide whether a share capital is an international transaction or not. Right now we don't have an option but to disclose it because the form prescribes ask for the disclosure. Whether share application money received pending allotment, whether that has to be disclosed, or when the money is actually, or the share capital is actually allotted, at that time you make a disclosure. Again, these are questions where there are no straight answers, there is no straight single answer that I can give it to you. To the extent possible, again, maximum disclosure from your side can help the process and avoid penalties. So even if a share application money received, you want to just disclose this thing that there is a money received on form of share application, no shares have been allotted, and therefore the disclosure is not made. So you don't disclose the amount, but you disclose the fact that something like this has happened. So you try and find a kind of a via media or a go between in between route. Debentures and preferentials, etc., all will come under this clause. And a very kind of a typical scenario what had happened is that a company here in India had taken loan from its associated enterprises abroad, and loan was taken in say year 1, for example say year ending March 2012, and when we came to March 13 there was no transaction, no interest payment, it's an interest free loan, there is no repayment, there was no fresh loans, nothing had happened during the year. The entire ledger balance, the ledger account was empty, except that at the end of the year there was the mark-to-market realization or the foreign exchange fluctuation, and that they had recognized in the books of accounts, saying that they have kind of increased the loan amount because there is an adverse foreign exchange fluctuation against them. The question whether this such kind of foreign exchange fluctuation should be reported or not, because ultimately your associated enterprise account is getting credited, your loan amount from 100 crores probably increasing to 102 crores or 103 crores. So this kind of questions would come up when you are looking at the books of accounts. Again, my view is that you don't have to disclose the foreign exchange fluctuation, because again, you've not taken any transaction. There is no transaction during the year. It's just the exchange fluctuation effect that you are giving the books of accounts. And the loan amount has remained in dollar terms same, although in rupee terms it is increased. In dollar terms it is the same, and therefore there is no transaction per se for you to disclose it over here. Clause 15 talks about guarantee. So it talks about guarantee, it does not talk about letter of comfort or standby letter of credits or standby letter of comforts. Again, there's no straight answers here, because the definition of international transaction does not talk about letter of comfort, but practically when you appear before the transfer officer, they tend to make an addition also on the letter of comfort that are given to the subsidiaries on behalf of the subsidiaries, and therefore whether they should be disclosed or not, from a penalty perspective, one can take a call, because the moment there is a question on whether it should be disclosed or not, and you talk to the client saying that, like in my view, we can take a chance by not disclosing, but there is a 2% penalty of the value of the transaction. Straight away it comes like better disclose it, because no one wants to kind of bear the brunt of penalty. This talks about any other debt arising during the course of business. So typically speaking, or technically speaking, it would cover your debtors, because it's a debt arising in the course of the business. Therefore, outstanding debtors receivable, and the kind of adjustment now the transfer officers are making on outstanding receivables, the question is where to report it. I still firmly hold the view that once a sales transaction is reported, there is no possibility of you reporting a separate debtor transaction. So it's not a separate transaction per se. Just by extending the credit period or giving an extended credit period doesn't mean that there is a separate transaction. So while a lot of people have started reporting this as a separate transaction in the form 3CB, saying that this is the account balance at the year end. Again, question would have come, what do you report? So they generally report account balance at the year end, saying that this is the debtor account balance at the year end, and since this clause requires some disclosure, we are disclosing this.
Excuse me, if partner is contributing to LLP, if the partner is NRI, whether we need to disclose here?
Yes. Capital.
Capital. Although he is an individual.
Although he is an individual.
So let's say LLP has been formed and he has, as a part of the agreement, he has made any contribution, so whether we have to disclose it?
Yes, absolutely. Because per se one thing is very clear, and that is what I have learned over the years. This disclosure in form 3CB, has actually nothing to do with the determination of arm's length price. What I understand when I talk to transfer officers and ask them, sir, why all these disclosures are required per se, he says, leave that to us, no. Whether the capital contribution, whether it is an arm's length or not, that he will decide. Whether the arm's length requirement, determination requirement is there also not, will decide. Your job is to just report it. You report it whatever comes your way, that way.
But you will have to mark some method for every transaction.
For that, CBDT has given no other method. So if nothing is applicable, you put as method.
This is only this year.
Question is when you compute the transaction value at 15 crore to refer the matter to TPO, if you disclose everything, every matter will be
Absolutely.
referred to the TPO by the assessing officer. So, is there any methodology to balance this two?
The methodology was available earlier where people used to put it in the form of notes without disclosing the number. Saying that the company has issued share capital. According to us, share capital is not an international transaction, therefore not reported.
Now there is no room.
But now there is no method kind of a thing. Because now you have to report it technically. And the fact is that the whatever comes in the mind is straight that 2% penalty. Till that 2% penalty fear is there in the mind, you tend to disclose everything that comes across.
Because account receivable will bulge to the aggregate limit.
Absolutely. It's a double reporting to my mind. It's a double reporting.
Assessing officer applies that blindly. Okay, refer to.
This is just the turtle and sends it.
These 15 crore limiting aggregate of domestic and the international transaction.
That 15 crore is nowhere in the act. It's just a press release given by the CBDT chairman at some point in time, which is not followed religiously. I have seen 2 crore cases also being referred to the TPO because the assessing officer does not want to take a chance. So 15 crore limit is nowhere in the act. It's just a misnomer, just a feel-good factor that the CBDT chairman at that point in time had given to everyone, saying that from 5 crore we have increased to 15 crore. The powers are with assessing officer. 2 crore, 1.5 crore also have been referred to the TPO. Debtors, I firmly believe you should not report it.
Right.
Because that's my personal view, although I've seen many Form 3CB and many other people reporting it. But somehow I believe it's a double reporting, the transaction is reported in Form 3CB. Yeah, as a chartered accountant, we need to check whether the credit period given to AE is within the reasonable time or not. If it's reasonable time, there is no advantage being passed on to AE, and therefore it does not qualify as a transaction per se. So that's a view that I would like to take. I hope somewhere some tribunal would accept that kind of a thing.
It could be the debt is liability also.
Other debt arising during the course of the business. It could be liabilities, it could be assets also, no? It's a debt ultimately.
Normally don't call it debtor as a debt. Only debt, only creditor as debt.
Yeah, I totally agree. So generally it is, general bidding is there. But if you look at the definition, so
receivable.
That's a different.
They're part of.
no, if see what one need to do is read this Form 3CB in line with the international transaction definition. The international transaction definition, capital financing talks about all receivables.
Sir, small question. Like
one foreign holding company is selling the shares of its subsidiary Indian company to another foreign company, and the transaction is overseas, and they are paying the taxes in India. So still the foreign company is under an obligation to file the Form 3CB in India?
100%, very much. Because the transaction is taxable in India. It's a capital gain transaction. It's between two associated enterprises, although it is overseas. What definition talks about it is as long as it's between two associated enterprises, either of whom are non-residents. So either one of the party has to be non-resident or both the party has to be non-residents. So in that case, it kind of gets covered under the definition of associated enterprise and international transaction. And plus, how would the TPO know whether the transaction amount is computed properly as per arm's length? The capital gain charge is on ultimately the sales value. So compliance is definitely required. In those cases, I find this Form 3CB falling flat because most of the clauses will not be applicable. You don't have books of accounts to verify, etc. So for foreign companies filing Form 3CB, it becomes a challenge as a chartered accountant to kind of certify something.
You're both the foreign companies will be filed, right? The buyer and the seller, because they're both of them are.
Again, in practical way, buyer is technically not supposed to file it. Technically supposed to file it, but there is no use of buyer filing it because it's purchasing the shares. There is no income taxable in India from the buyer's side on that transaction. So My advice is that buyer should not file it, seller should file it, and as long as seller files it, it's a proper compliance.
But clause 16 asks about the purchase or sale of the so buyer has to.
But the answer is that, so in that sense, if you see, if one has to take a extremely legal, any company not having presence in India would have to file a Form 3CB also. So I feel that there has to be some connection to the income taxable in India. If there is no income generating out of it, then there is no question of filing it for file.
Buying the share, like in Voda case, they were also buyer. And ultimately, they are facing all this hassle. So ultimately, it's a buyer who has to report, otherwise they will come into debited.
No, but that is a form of withholding tax perspective.
Even with section 56 and all those things, there
It will
is
be an income.
income tax
according to
that.
section 56.
No, 56 is for domestic transactions mainly.
It says that non-resident is exempt.
No,
They
no,
are applies to only resident.
only to residents. So 56 is for domestic transaction. In domestic transaction, the definition of SDT is very narrow. It does not talk about all transactions. It talks about only kind of 48 and all those kind of transactions. So it doesn't quite fall under that. Clause 17 talks about mutual agreement or arrangement. 18 talks about business restructuring, reorganization. 19 is something which is given to everyone, saying that if you want to report anything that you feel missed out, so any other transaction. And 20 talks about deemed international transaction, which is there as per section 92B2, the definition of deemed international transaction. So these are the cases where generally all the miscellaneous transactions get reported. Clause 19 is the clause where most of the miscellaneous transactions get reported, like reimbursements, bad debts. So people used to report services rendered free of cost under any other transaction also. Goods received at sample, goods received free of cost. The question is that the main question that comes across.
Immediately they reject dividend or the distribute that whatever distributed.
Net of the DD.
Net of.
Net of DD. Because what is paid,
Not the grossing.
not the gross. The question is, do you report dividend first? It talks about any other transaction. It does not ask you to separately report dividend. So again, people have taken different views. And my personal view is that again, dividend is not a reportable transaction per se. Now, if you look at the definition of international transaction, everything will go under the sun. Everything under the sun will kind of come as reportable transaction. But one has to kind of somewhere strike a balance in terms of what is the ultimate objective of the transfer pricing provisions, what the information is required by the officer, etc., and then give it. Otherwise, it becomes your report would be itself from 3CP itself will run into 50-100 pages easily.
Sir, when we notice come for 92 assessment, 92C assessment, then they TPO generally ask in the notice per se, kindly submit the report on indirect transfer of the shares of the holding company. I don't know whether Bombay office is also issuing the notices, has a clause of so
Actually, Bombay office is not issuing it.
So in Delhi we used to get the notice in which a writing is, one sentence is there, indirect transfer of the holding company. So is it a part of 3CEB? Is Indian company who is a subsidiary or the downstream operating company is under an obligation to report the transfer of?
No, it is not under the obligation because it's not a part of Indian company's Form 3CP. That is very clear. It's not a transaction that I have entered into. It's a transaction of the foreign company. They can send notices to the foreign company. One confusion that generally remains is management fees or common sharing of expenses, IT cost or something of that sort. Where do you report? Do you report it as kind of mutual agreement or arrangement? Do you report it in any other transaction? Or do you report it as service clause? Because ultimately there is a service rendered also in that. So as long as there is some element of services, it should be reported under service cost. It could be that, okay, for example, management fees, where they are providing IT, legal, HR, all services on a cost-to-cost basis to all subsidiaries. So there should, even if there is no markup, it's a reimbursement of expense, but there is a service element to it. So you should report it under the service cost. If there is no service element, then it could be under mutual agreement arrangement or any other transaction. Again, tax officers don't go too much into which clause it is reported as long as it is reported. Now for most of the clauses, what are the details required? For all these clauses that I kind of took you through, the details are required is obviously name and address of the associated enterprises, description of transaction and kind of quantitative details, the volume of the transaction in terms of the units or quantity. What is the total amount paid, payable, receivable as per the books of accounts, as computed having regard to the arm's length price. Now here there is a very nice savior actually available to the chartered accountants, because if you read the form, it talks about as computed by the assessee having regard to the arm's length price. So the computation, what we have to say is that this is the computation of arm's length price done by the assessee, and I am reporting just that. The computation of arm's length price is not the onus of the chartered accountant. It is only the reporting part that is the onus of the chartered accountant. So that way it is a great relief for the auditor or for the chartered accountant, because the computational part is not put on us at least. You have to just report what the assessee has computed. So even if he has computed the same, you have to report it here, simple. Which is the most appropriate method determined in the used in determination of arm's length price. So again, my opinion is that you don't have to determine whether that is the most appropriate method or not. Because that's not your job to determine whether most appropriate method has been used or not. As a Form 3CB issuer, as a person who is signing Form 3CB, you have to say taxpayer has adopted comparable and control price as the most appropriate method. Simple. Whether it is right or not for you to judge. In case of loan and other details are required, like financing arrangement, currency of the loan, interest rate, etc. are also required. So these are the general clauses which are required in each of the clauses. Then we go on to kind of specify domestic transaction and on the domestic transfer pricing. And this is the part of the form which has kind of come in completely new last year. So
the last most appropriate method.
Yeah.
The TP study is done by a chartered accountant. Normally, I was on last comment on ALP and the most appropriate method, that we are only certifying the method selected by the client. So my question was, when we do a TP study, chartered accountant does a TP study, most probably identifies what method you will utilize because of the availability of the data and the comparables.
Right.
So in those circumstances, can you still maintain that the ALP is computed by most appropriate method as given to us by client?
First itself, that point itself, whether a chartered accountant can do a TP study and certify Form 3CB, frankly sir, I have not been able to get an answer to that. I always felt that there is a conflict of interest there, because you are yourself preparing a documentation,
Right.
and you are certifying that this documentation is prescribed in the first part of the Form 3CB. So generally, like you can't write books of accounts and then audit it. This is very similar to that, but I have gone through the institute guidance and everything. I have not found answer to this question, whether as a chartered accountant can I prepare a documentation report in the same form issues the CA certificate. I find there is a complete conflict of interest there.
So my question was that.
Then you report it. So you do not know what rate or what basis company is taking.
Right.
You are reporting post facto. So the question which is asking has got no relevance.
No. I'm saying when you prepare a documentation report, the transaction has happened post facto. You prepare a documentation report and you say, okay, comparable and control prices method is the most appropriate method. Now, question is, as chartered accountant, we are only advising the client saying that this is the right method or this is the wrong method or this is how the arm's length price is derived. So we are acting in a dual capacity in that sense. So that is a larger issue, which right now no one has raked up for all these years. Whether the same firm can issue a TP report and certify the Form 3CB or not. But to my mind, you can't do both of those things.
You can't do both.
You can't do both because you are yourself certifying the documentation prepared by.
In practice, it is done like that only.
It is done that. Okay. On the domestic transfer pricing side, the clauses are more or less similar. Clause 21 talks about name and address of the AE along with permanent account number, nature of business relationship, and brief business description. Again, nature of business nature of relationship is becoming very complicated because domestic transfer pricing, as you are aware, also covers inter-unit transactions. So, per se, there are no two different associated enterprises. It's the same one unit selling to other unit. that way. So what do you write in the nature of business relationship, etc. It's a drop-down box right now available, so not a problem. But you have to select one of those drop-down items only. So you can always say that there is no other option available, and this was the nearest or the closest drop-down that was available, and I have selected this. But per se, there is no relationship between two units, often associated enterprises. It's a fiction that they have put in over here. Clause 22 talks about any expenditure to persons under 48(2)(b), and kind of general questions that will deal in domestic transferring. I'm not going to deal here whether capital expenditure is covered under 48(2)(b) or not. Director's remuneration method benchmarking. I think I'll kind of let it to the next speaker who's going to do with the domestic transfer pricing. Clause 23A and clause 23B, they are very interesting. It talks about goods or services transferred between eligible business units. So it talks 23A and B talks about transfers from tax holiday undertaking to non-tax holiday undertaking. 23A talks about goods and services transferred by an eligible tax holiday unit to a non-tax holiday unit, and clause 23B talks about acquired or purchased from a non-tax holiday unit. Clause 24 talks about transactions under ATI 10 or 10AA with closely connected persons resulting in more than ordinary profit. So if you read the clause, the clause says that have you entered into a transaction with a closely connected person as per section ATI 10 or 10AA which has resulted in more than ordinary profits. So if you have to report transaction between say two companies which are technically falling under ATI 10, the moment you say yes, it means you are admitting to both the facts. First of all, you are admitting to the fact that you are entered into a transaction. You are also admitting to the fact that it has resulted into more than ordinary profits. So again, a very bad drafting by the government saying that if I just have to report without admitting to the fact that it has resulted in more than ordinary profits, you have not provided any clause for that. So again, if there is a transaction with an ATI 10 unit where you believe it has not resulted in more than ordinary profits, my personal advice is put no over here, because it has not resulted into more than ordinary profits. By apparent caution, you want to disclose that, disclose in some other clause. Like there is a clause 25 for any other transaction. But if you report here, it means you are admitting.
I'll report it in the total value of the transaction and then not do anything.
That is also feasible. Reporting should come, but at the same time, I don't want the admission to come that it has resulted in more than ordinary profits. Again, I don't know what was the thought process for the government to introduce this clause. Or the extreme aggressive view is that if you, as a chartered accountant, if the company believes that it has not resulted in more than ordinary profits, don't report it anyway. Because the clause doesn't ask me to report it. Simple.
But you have to do some exercise, isn't it?
You have to do the exercise. You have to keep the documentation.
That there is no.
Absolutely. So documentation you have to keep in place, but reporting is not required.
You have to take management certificate for this.
Management certificate would be essential. It will come in the representation part of it. And also your own judgment in terms of whether it is done that or not. Both would be required. Again, closely connected is not defined under ATI 10. So they expect chartered accountants and that company to put transaction is closely connected people without defining what is closely connected.
What is the guidance in that?
You go by the general definition, whether it's a group company or not. How do you treat it in the general sense of it? Whether you treat it as a part of the same group or you actually treat it as an independent party. And there the owners will be completely honest to establish if it is not closely connected.
The view is canvas that you can take the dimming friction relationship to come to a close connection.
Dimming friction under 92?
92.
Yes, possible. Under 92 as well as 48.
Yeah.
So what happens to cost allocations between eligible and non-eligible limit? Where do you report? Again, my strict view is that it is not reportable transaction. It's just a cost allocation. It's not actually a transaction between two units. But if you have to report it, it actually doesn't get kind of falls under any of the clauses because it talks about goods or services.